Well, we've been on this series called Friendship now for some time. Bishop started us off in this series, and there have been a lot of lessons learned. And I don't know whether you are there and you are wondering, why friendship? Why are we looking at friendship? Why not some other topic? And the first thing you need to know is that it's an important subject because as Christians, we are called to cultivate meaningful relationships. It's that great preacher, Spurgeon, who said that it's interesting that we are not likened to lions or to bears or some of those other creatures that wander alone. He said we are likened to sheep. And if you know anything about sheep, sheep like to get together. Sheep go in flocks. And so do God's people. And so, in that respect, then there is no option for us but to take seriously this whole idea of cultivating meaningful relationships. And more so when we think about just the season that we have been in, we are coming out from, during that COVID space, when we were all forced to social distance. All of a sudden, the people who were in our social circles, who those were, became important. Maybe some of you, it became a very trying time and it was an opportunity for you to get to know who your friends truly were. Or maybe it was, for some of you, an opportunity to get to know, maybe I don't really have friends. And so we are forced to think about this whole issue about our friendships. People who we can do life with. People who can pick us up when we fall and so on. There's no such thing as being a lone-ranging Christian. I'm trying to make it to heaven alone, in solitary. Well, as Christians, we have to walk with others. And so I feel like when you think about that, then the whole subject of friendship is really important. Today I was hoping to finish this series by looking at the story of how David kept his promise to Jonathan in the very end, even through Jonathan's own son. But as I was preparing, hoping to end today, there was so much good stuff in there. So I thought maybe we'll have one more Sunday to finish this. Okay? So today and next Sunday. And then hopefully, if the Lord wills, we will finish this series. But allow me to give you a background of some of the things that Bishop already mentioned to us about this great friendship between David and Jonathan. We see it in 1 Samuel chapter 18. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, we know it says there in verse 3 that Jonathan, he made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off his robe that he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. As a commitment in this covenant that they were making that, hey, I'm going to be your friend. I'm going to be vulnerable to you. It's going to be you and I for life. That's what he was saying, a commitment to their relationship. And then they will renew again this commitment to their friendship again in 1 Samuel chapter 20. It was at a time when King Saul wanted to take out David and kill him. And so Jonathan stepped in to defend David. And this is the conversation that is captured there for us in 1 Samuel chapter 20 verse 13. He says this, "But if my father intends to harm you, may the Lord deal with Jonathan, be it ever so severely, if I do not let you know and send you away in peace. May the Lord be with you as he was with my father. But show me unfailing kindness, like the Lord's kindness, as long as I live, so that I may not be killed." I want you to underline those words. Show me kindness. Unfailing kindness, like the Lord's kindness. Because we're going to see these words come up again. as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. And do not ever cut off your kindness from my family. And not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord call on David's enemies to account. And it goes on and on. So they made something I call a kindness pact. Covenant, but a kindness pact. Don't fail to show your unfailing kindness, like the Lord's kindness. Don't cut off your kindness for my own family. And so that was just the background, but the story itself, what I want us to focus on today, comes from 2 Samuel chapter 9. That will be our major focus today, but I just felt it is important for us to do that, to paint that backdrop. So 2 Samuel chapter 9. Are you all there? Trying to see whether the verses are being projected. Okay, now I've divided this whole story. We'll read the whole chapter 9. I've divided it into 4 scenes. Just sort of like a movie. Okay? So the first one will be scene 1, I'm calling the recollection. Scene 2, the reward. Scene 3, the response. And then the last scene, the restoration. Okay? So let's go to scene 1 in this most excellent movie in 2 Samuel. So, chapter 9. David asked, is there anyone still left in the house of David, in the house of Saul, to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? So it's like David remembers. David had become king already. He had ruled for some years. He had firmly established the kingdom into his own hands. And so he remembered, you know what? I made a promise to this guy. It's time for me to keep my promise. Is there anyone in the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Thank God for friends who keep their promises. How many of you have friends like those? Well, I'm surprised. If I had a friend in here who would be offended, I'd be like, wow. I thought I was... Thank God for friends who keep their promises. I tell you, I will do this. Later on, when it is probably even not convenient for them, they do it at a great cost to themselves. They make a pledge and they meet it. The sort of friend David was. Jonathan is not there. I mean, many of us do make statements, at one point when we are, the air is good and everything, we'll do this, I'll do this, and we'll do the other. And then later on down the line, we ruka guys, right? Mimi, you heard me say that. But David remembers and he says, is there anyone still left that I can show kindness? You remember that word? Isn't that what really their pact was with Jonathan? A kindness pledge. I want to show kindness for Jonathan's sake. And I want you to underline that word, Jonathan's sake. Because we shall revisit that phrase again. Verse 2. Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. And they summoned him to appear before David and the king. And the king said to him, are you Ziba? In my mind I was thinking maybe David was really thinking about this whole issue, and maybe it was known in the temple courts. He's seeking out somebody from the house of David. And maybe he was told there's a guy called Ziba, who used to work for those guys. So Ziba comes now into the palace. Are you Ziba? At your service, he replied. And the king asked, is there no one still left in the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness? This is really what Jonathan was saying earlier. Show me kindness like the Lord's kindness. David says, I want to show somebody in that house God's kindness. And Ziba answered the king, there is still a son of Jonathan, he is lame in both feet. While I was reading this, I thought that was a strange description. I wondered what would have been easier to say. The man's disability or whatever, or yes, there is, his name is so-and-so, and this is where he is, and things of that nature. So who is this guy? Because Ziba never says anything beyond that. And how did he even end up becoming, lame? And so this is previously on 2 Samuel. Now I want us to go a few chapters back, okay? And some of you do watch series and movies, and so you understand this language, and you know how they tell you a backstory and so on. So this is the backstory, 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4. In 2 Samuel chapter 4 is a story of a guy called Ishbasheth. Ishbasheth was a son of Saul. Now when David became king, he wasn't ruling the entire kingdom. Not at first. He was just ruling his own community while at Hebron. And Ishbasheth, the son of Saul, was ruling sort of the whole of Israel. And there was war between these two people. David, who had been anointed to be king, and Ishbasheth, who sort of felt like I'm the next in line to the throne. And so 2 Samuel chapter 4 is a story of how Ishbasheth was killed. And by the way, David's heart was really broken by this whole incident. David had no part to play in it. And it is a story, you can read it for yourself, of how mad David was that Ishbasheth had been killed, which completely confused me because he was his enemy. But smack in the middle of that story, in brackets, 2 Samuel chapter 4 verse 4, we are told the story of Jonathan's son. It says this: Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled. But as she hurried to leave, he fell and became disabled. His name was Mephibosheth. So a little backstory of how he became disabled. I don't know why we are told this story. Well, it could be, maybe the author wanted us to know Ishbasheth will be killed, but there will still be one member of the family that remains. He's disabled, and this is what happened to him. Well, we don't know how he became disabled. Did he get compound fractures? Was his spinal cord messed up? Who knows? All we know is that he was lame. Now, speaking of lameness, there's another incident that happened in chapter 5 of 2 Samuel. Just the next chapter. And I thought it was interesting to mention because I questioned myself whether it had anything to do with what David was about to do next. 2 Samuel chapter 5. This is the story of how David captured Jerusalem. He says, verse 6, the king and his men marched to Jerusalem to attack the Jebusites who lived there. The Jebusites said to David, you will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off. Now, the Jebusites still occupied Jerusalem, which was quite odd, because the children of Israel, when they came out from Egypt, they were supposed to capture the whole area of Canaan. And Jerusalem was supposed to be part of it, but they had never managed to capture it. This whole time, it was still being occupied by foreigners. Even during the whole time Saul reigned as king, they were not able to take up Jerusalem. The Jebusites still occupied that territory. It was a very hard place to occupy just because of the topography of the place, and you can go and do your own history of the land. But now David wanted Jerusalem. And so when he went there, they mocked him. They insulted him, taunted him. And they said, oh, what are you trying to do? Even the lame and the blind can ward you off. For they thought, David cannot get in here. Verse 7, nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, which was later on called the city of David. On that day, David had said, anyone who conquers the Jebusites will have to use the water shaft to reach those lame and blind who are David's enemies. Some of your translations have a little A maybe there, or some little marking, who are David's enemies. And if you look at that A, my translation says, who are hated by David. Or as the King James Version says, hated by David's soul. Very odd, very weird, just somewhere there. And then the next line is even more perplexing. It says, that is why they say, the blind and the lame will not enter there. The NIV says palace. The King James, the ESV says the house, or something like that. And commentators have talked about this issue. What was going on here? We know that David was insulted. Yes, it was common practice to make this sort of insults. How did it become a whole legend, even a whole saying later on? The lame and the blind shall not enter into the house. Commentators, some of them try to say, look, it could be then David just took the whole of the Jebusites to be the lame and the blind. And he hated them with his whole soul. And he said they shall never enter into the house. Some commentators say maybe the house meant the temple that will later be built there. And so on. So there is always this discussion that was going on. But all we know is that there was a saying, the lame and the blind shall not enter into the house or into the palace, as the NIV puts it. So with that backdrop, let's go forward to the story where we were. David asks Ziba, is there anyone else still left in the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness? And Ziba answers the king, yes, there is still one, a son of Jonathan. He is lame on both his feet. And I couldn't help but wonder, did Ziba say this as a way of issuing a disqualification? Yeah, there's still one in the house of Saul, but you don't want that guy. I wondered. Maybe as a disqualification, disqualifying the guy. Well, this is what David said next. Verse 4, and I'm on now to scene 2, which is the reward. Verse 4, where is he? The king asked. Ziba answered, he is at the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lo-debar. So first of all, Mephibosheth was homeless. That's what we learn, okay? He was a homeless fugitive. He didn't even have a place of his own. He used to crash at this other guy's home called Machir. And so David had him brought from Lo-debar, from the house of Machir, son of Amiel. This lame guy was now brought into the palace. I wondered, maybe David had since moved on. Maybe that phrase that we read earlier meant nothing. Or maybe David had matured up. Previously, maybe he had caught feelings about how he had been insulted, and maybe now he had moved on. Or maybe the friendship with Jonathan was so great that nothing would stop in the way of David doing the right thing. He was able to overlook maybe his biases, maybe even the deficiencies in the man, in order to honor this friendship. So Mephibosheth was brought into the palace. Verse 6, when Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. And David said, Mephibosheth, at your service, he replied. Verse 7, he said, don't be afraid. David said to him, and I want you to know there was reason, there was cause for him to be afraid. First of all, this is what used to happen. If you came from the family of the king, and that king came out of power and somebody else became king, you better run for your life, because the new guy will take you out. To eliminate all his threats, he will take you out. So there was reason to be afraid. You came from the wrong family. You are enemy of the state, number one. And then number two, of course, he's lame, so he's helpless, he's weak, he cannot defend himself. And then if that phrase that we read earlier had any meaning at all, then he was not welcome here. And he knew it. I'm not welcome here. Is this a setup? So David says, do not be afraid, and he continues to say, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. He comes back again. For the sake of Jonathan. Mephibosheth, not for your sake. There is nothing awesome about you. Nothing reward-worthy about you, Mephibosheth. This is not about you. This is about somebody else. For his sake, I will do good to you. That's what David was saying here. And then he says this, I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. Now I know, as I was reading, some of you have read along with me, and you're like, Next verse. Friends, I want us to linger there for a moment because I don't want you to miss what was going on here. The thing that David was proposing was outrageous. That he wanted to give to Mephibosheth all the land that King Saul had. Now, do you know how long King Saul had been king? King Saul had been king for 40 years. And kings in those days, they had absolute power. They had absolute power. So I can imagine in 40 years, King Saul had been able to amount a lot of wealth, gather a lot of wealth for himself, probably land. By the way, Samuel the prophet had warned the children of Israel about this. He had said, you guys are asking for a king. You don't know these kings. Let me tell you what kings will do. They will multiply their wealth. They will take your land. They will take your daughters. They will do this and that. And you remember that? So you don't want kings. They multiply their wealth. And I think that is true about leaders everywhere around the world, right? They multiply their wealth. The king who had been reigning for 40 years, all his property was to be given to you. I think we can confidently say probably at that instant, Mephibosheth became one of the richest men in Israel. If not the richest, one of the richest. He immediately entered the billionaires club. He was homeless. From squatter to baller. That's what's going on here. I mean, can you imagine? If you were asked, okay, just pick any of the presidents that has ever reigned this country, and all that they have, you become sole heir. So, did I say sole heir? You have a more card, right? This is outrageous. For a man who was homeless, a fugitive in exile. This was mind-blowing. And yet, as if that was not enough, he says here, you will always eat at my table. What he was saying is that I open the palace to you. Mephibosheth, you will be provided for by this house. You will be eating here. like one of my sons. And I thought, wow, he doesn't even need all that land. He doesn't need all that crops and whatever. He doesn't probably need it. Maybe he doesn't even pay tax because the government provides for him. Right? Now think about it. Which one would you rather? Okay, would you rather you became a billionaire overnight? Okay, or you had free access to State House. You eat there, you go there anytime, you have free access to the president, you can hang out with him, you can have a relationship with him. Government provides for you, you don't pay taxes. Which one would you rather? Billionaire or government provides for you, you eat at State House? Which one? Wow, that was easy. Well, Mephibosheth did not have to choose. He was a billionaire who eats at State House. Do you get how crazy this is? This is crazy. And so, it's how the story continues. By the way, as I was thinking about this, I just thought, wow, God's kindness can shock you sometimes. When God chooses to be kind to you, He can shock you. He has the potential to shock you. I mean, Mephibosheth was entering the palace scared. He had to be told, don't be afraid. And then this outrageous claims or proposition is made to him. I mean, how many of you are open to God shocking you like that? Like, God, here I am, shock me. Just The question is, can you handle it? That's the question. But story continues like this. Verse 8. And I'm on to scene 3, which is the response. Mephibosheth bowed down and said, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" Which was really the most appropriate response. I mean, who am I? Who am I that you would take notice of me? I'm a slave, I'm a dead dog. I mean, some of you have dogs, right? Mephibosheth notes, he didn't say, I am a dog, which would have been, you're lowering yourself, right? He didn't say dog. Because if you have a dog, you know there's some use for a dog. I had a dog. It barked a lot, everything, it scratched, guys, but we had a use for it. He says, I am a dead dog. Let me tell you something about dead dogs. They are useless. Well, they're even worse than useless. Dead dogs stink. And that's what Mephibosheth was saying here. Man, I stink. What are you doing to me? He could not just wrap his mind around this mind-blowing proposition that the king was making. This is what he wants to do for him. I'm saying that was a befitting response. I am unworthy. That's what he was saying. Story continues like this. I'm now to the last scene, and then we will make some application on this story. The restoration. Verse 9, the king summoned Ziba, Saul's steward, and said to him, I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. So not just Saul, Saul and his family, everything that they have belongs to this guy. That's what I've done. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops, so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table. It says there in brackets now, Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. You're like, why did Ziba have so many servants? Unless, when David made that proposition to give everything to Mephibosheth, there is probably somebody who was not very happy with that, because it meant that they were losing what had come to become theirs. Because you see, Ziba was the one who was taking care of Saul's estate. Now, when Saul was taken out, Saul's family was taken out, and this lame guy is staying in exile, at whose house? Homeless exile. Guess who had come to take up the property? Ziba. And he had his 20 servants and 15 sons. Guess what was happening right now? It was called demotion. Ziba was now becoming a servant together with his servants. And so if you're here and you're not a committed Christian and you think you and the Father are cool, I want you to know that you are not cool. If you're seated here and you somehow imagine that the Father can do these things to you and you are not related to the one he loves, you're dreaming. Mephibosheth was right, a dead dog like me. Why are you doing this to me? There is no way good can be done to you if you are not from the right relations. And so an offer is being made to you today. Oh, do not harden your heart. Don't do the crazy thing of refusing to be identified with Christ and refusing God's kindness that is being offered to you this day. Amen? Let us pray. Oh Lord, this story is so clear. It's so mind-blowing, Lord. I don't think it has even entered our minds yet. What we have come, just the favor and the kindness that you have shown us, now that you are extending your friendship to us. I don't even know whether it has entered our minds yet, just how privileged we are. And we see, Lord, that in one day Mephibosheth's life changed. In one day this exile, this outcast, this homeless nobody became so rich, became so highly favored, became the friend of the king, to eat and dine with him. And Lord, it blows our mind to think that such an offer has been placed also on our tables. That in the spiritual realm, that the same thing is true for us. That for the sake of Christ, that we have been shown friendship and kindness that our finite minds is not able to comprehend. And how I pray, Lord, for every Christian, every believer in here, that this will result in our worship. That when we walk out of here and go home, that we will go home with a smile on our face. That we will go home with revelation. Oh, this is what has happened to me. This is the privilege that has been extended to me. This is the blessing that is mine. That we will no longer hang our heads low. That we will no longer walk around as if we are homeless. We will no longer live as if we are abandoned or disenfranchised. That we will remember that we have been shown favor by the King. And I pray for those in our midst, Lord, who are not in a relationship with Christ. That you will draw them to yourself through your Son. That you will remember to extend your mercy to them on account of Christ. Grant that they would have malleable hearts. That they will be willing, Lord, to accept, to be related with the one who is loved. And that your goodness, your kindness will lead them to repentance. Oh God, today we are praying that many more Mephibosheths in the house will get to experience this amazing favor and blessing that has come to those whom you now call your friends. We give you all the glory, we give you all the honor. Help us, Lord, to think about these things.